Do you set yourself up for failure in your business without even realizing it? As entrepreneurs, failure is part of the game. We know that. Not everything's going to go as we plan. But today I want to dive in how we reframe failure as a tool for growth. And I've got 4 quick ways that you can adjust your mindset so that failure is actually growing. Let's dive in. Are you that driven entrepreneur who believes that working harder holds the key to your dreams? Are you drowning in the day-to-day tasks, wishing you had more time to strategize and cast the vision for your business growth? Hi, I'm Donna Dubé, your guide on this entrepreneurial journey. I've walked in your worn-out shoes, burning the midnight oil, convinced that sheer hard work was the secret to success. Just one more email, one more task, until I found myself on a one-way track to burnout. But here's the twist in the tale. I discovered that success isn't just about working harder, it's about working smarter. It's about being intentional with our time. It's about steering our ship with focus, because no team, system, or automation can outperform a lack of direction. In this podcast, I'm sharing with you all the strategies for business growth that it took me years to learn. If you're ready to step out of the daily overwhelm so you can amplify your profits, then I'm ready to teach you. I believe the only limit to your business growth is the one you set for yourself. Go grab a notebook, warm up that cup of tea, and let's do this. Hello, and welcome back, entrepreneurs. I'm so happy you're here. Today, I'm diving into a topic that we've all experienced somewhere along the way. Of course, we've all experienced in our personal lives, but we've all experienced it as a business owner as well. And the truth of it is, most of us don't like it. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say we hate it, but what I'm talking about is failure. Yeah, that dreaded F word. But today, instead of letting it bring us down, we're going to flip the script and talk about how to reframe failure as a tool for growth. Stick with me though. Before I dive into that, I want to do a quick little summary to go through what actually happens in our brains when we fail. So whether it's a small misstep or a huge flop, our brain's error detector system, called the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC for short, goes into overdrive when we misstep or we have a failure. It sends signals to the amygdala, which is our fear center, and the hippocampus, which forms our memories. And all of this creates a cocktail and a busyness and an action inside our brain and emotions that make us want to avoid similar situations in the future. So, why am I giving you this tidbit of neuroscience lesson? Well, because this is important for us as entrepreneurs and business owners. It tells us that failure can easily shut us down. It's hardwired into us. That's how our brain works. But here's the good news. Once we understand this, we can hack our brains to work around it. I want to start by telling you a quick story. You may have heard of this before or not, I'm not sure, but a while back, a man named Mark Rober, he's a former NASA engineer and turned now into a YouTuber, but he did a fun study and he had 50,000 people in his study. And in the study, they were playing a game, and to them, it seemed like the game was all about learning how to code, how to, program the computer to make it do certain things. But this game wasn't about coding. It was actually an experiment on failure. And so the group of 50,000 people were split into 2 parts. Half of them were simply told when they couldn't solve the little computer code puzzle that they had failed. So a message would just pop up and it said they're failed. The other half, when they couldn't solve the puzzle, a message popped up and said, you failed and you lost 5 points. That's it. Just an arbitrary loss of points that didn't mean anything in real life. And the results are staggering. The group that had points taken away gave up way faster than the group that was told they failed. Why? Because when failure is framed in a way that feels like a loss, we tend to back off more, we tend to avoid it, and ultimately we stop trying. And let me tell you, this is something I see all the time with business owners. We set these arbitrary goals or rules, if you will, for ourselves that are really so easy to fail at. It's like setting ourselves up for disappointment on purpose. So, for example, imagine you've just started a podcast and you tell yourself, I'll succeed only if I post one episode every week for the year. But what happens when life gets in the way and you miss a week? That's an easy failure right there. And trust me, this has happened to every podcaster, every business owner, every entrepreneur out there. We do this with our revenue goals too. Maybe you've told yourself, I'll know I'm successful when I hit X revenue by the end of the year. But if you're just shy of that number, does that mean you failed? Absolutely not. But our brains love to tell us otherwise. So, how do we stop this cycle? How do we hack our brains so that we can stop letting failure take over our mindset and our motivation? So let's dive in. We've got 4 tips for you today on how to hack your brain so that this failure and this fear of failing doesn't take over. So tip number 1 is reframing it as an experiment. So this really starts with our mindset, and we have to do it before the activity happens. So instead of seeing new ideas and new ventures as sort of win or lose situations, we start to see them as experiments. And if you think back to your elementary school science days, an experiment doesn't have such a thing as failing, right? You're trying something out. You're collecting data. You're trying to see what happens when you do this or you adjust that. There's no sense of failure there. You're either going to get a reaction that you expected or you're not. You're just collecting data. And whether it works or not, the point is to learn something from it. And so I find reframing what I'm doing in my business as an experiment really helps me. Anytime I try a new strategy or tactic, I label it as an experiment. That way, even if it doesn't go as planned, I'm still winning because I've learned something new. And this mindset shift can make a huge difference for you. So let's say you're gearing up for a new launch of a product, a program, or a service, and you and your team have been working hard for months to get this ready. And you tell yourself, if I don't hit 50 sales, then this launch is a failure. This is a pretty common trap, and I'm sure you've said something like this to yourself before, or you know business owners who have said something like this. And what we've done here is we've attached all of our success to this one number. If I don't hit 50 sales, this launch is a failure. But what happens if you fall short and you only get 20 sales? That's still 20 people who are interested and excited about what you're offering. But because you didn't hit your arbitrary goal of 50, it's easy to label the entire launch as a failure. The reality is that you're building momentum. You're learning what worked and what didn't. And this makes you better positioned for your next launch. So instead of setting a rigid sales number as your success metric, try reframing it. Make your primary goal to learn what resonates with your audience or to gather feedback from people who did buy, rather than worrying about that arbitrary number that you didn't hit. And this way, whether you hit 20 sales or 50 or 70, you've still succeeded in learning something valuable for your next step. Another idea here is what if instead of aiming for a massive first launch, you approached your launch in phases? So you could start by testing the waters with a small beta launch. Let's say your goal is to get 10 testers who are willing to give feedback and help you refine your product or your program or your service. And this way, instead of viewing it as all or nothing, you've now made an experiment where you're collecting data. And if those beta testers give you rave reviews, then you know you're onto something. And if they come back with suggestions for improvement, you've still gained insight and can adjust for the next phase of your launch. Either way, it's a win, and you've avoided the emotional crash that comes from setting an unrealistic expectation on yourself and your business, right? This idea of overnight success, like let's just drop it today. All right, another thing we can do to set ourselves up for success is creating systems that make it hard for us to fail. And this is what I like to call rigging the game in our favor. So let's say you're trying to get consistent with your social media posting. And instead of setting an arbitrary goal like, I need to post every day, what if you made the goal simpler? Maybe you aim to post 3 times a week, and anything extra is a bonus. By lowering the bar just slightly to something more achievable, you're not setting yourself up for failure at the first missed post, right? Because 3 times a week is more achievable than I must post every day. And as soon as you miss one, now you're in failure mode. But if you set it up and make it simpler and make it more achievable, and you get more posts than that, well, that's a win. And now you're excited and motivated to want to keep going. All right, the third tip I have for you is avoid self-labeling. Let me explain. One of the worst things we can do is label ourselves as a failure. I know I have done this to myself before, and it's really demotivating and unproductive. Just because something didn't go as planned doesn't mean you are a failure. It just means you're human, and like every other human, you're learning. If you miss a step in your business or a goal, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means it's time to adjust. And I think back to my days when my kids were very little and parenting and, helping those little ones take those first steps. They took some steps and they fall. They take a couple more steps and they fall. But what were we doing as parents? We were cheering them on, right? They get back up and try another couple steps. They weren't looking at themselves as a failure because they couldn't walk across the room yet. They were happy to see us cheering them on, and they'd go and try again. And that's the type of attitude we're trying to trick our brain into when we're running our business. So imagine you've been working with a handful of clients, and one of them suddenly decides not to renew your contract. And if this is a fairly large amount of revenue that's coming into your business, then your immediate reaction might be to think, oh, I must have failed as a business owner. Maybe I'm not good at this. And this is where that self-labeling comes in. You take a specific situation, like losing one client, and suddenly you're questioning your entire ability to run a business. When we know the truth is, clients come and go. And there's many reasons for that. And it doesn't always reflect on your skills or your business, right? Maybe their budget shifted or they decided to go in a different direction. Like there's so many reasons why they may leave. And none of it means that you are a failure. So instead of labeling yourself as the problem, take a step back and look at the situation more objectively. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Could I have improved my communication or my service? Or was this just part of the natural ebb and flow of business? You see, by shifting from self-labeling to a learning mindset, you avoid the emotional weight of calling yourself a failure and instead focus on growing from the experience. Losing a client doesn't define your entire business, and it certainly doesn't define your ability to succeed. It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. All right, finally, my last tip for today is to reflect and adjust. So when you experience what feels like a failure, instead of getting stuck in it, I want you to reflect and adjust. Ask yourself, what did I learn? How can I do things differently next time? This reflective approach keeps you moving forward rather than staying stuck in the emotions of failure. So let's say you've spent a few weeks preparing for an upcoming webinar, right? You put together great content, you've been promoting it to your audience, and when the day arrives, only a handful of people show up live, far less than you expected. And it's easy to feel discouraged and think, I failed. No one really cares or is interested in what I'm offering. But instead of seeing it as a failure, this is the perfect time to reflect and adjust. Start by asking yourself these key questions. What went well with the webinar? Did the people who did attend live engage with the content? What could I do differently next time? Was my promotion strategy strong enough? Did I reach the right audience? And by asking these questions, you're going to get objective data. Maybe you realize that your email campaign could have been more targeted, or perhaps the timing that you booked the webinar wasn't ideal for your audience. You can adjust by trying a different time, using new promotion tactics, or even tweaking your messaging to better speak to what your audience truly cares about. So by reflecting on what worked and what didn't, and then making adjustments based on that feedback, you set yourself up for better results next time. And yes, there's gonna be a next time, because remember, this is just an experiment. The key here is to avoid dwelling on the initial turnout and instead focus on what you can learn and improve for future webinars. Every launch or every event offers valuable lessons if you take the time to find them. All right, as we wrap up today, I want you to think about how you view failure in your business. Are you setting yourself up with arbitrary rules and goals that make it easy to fail? Are you labeling yourself when things don't go as planned? Let's start today treating every new venture or step in our business as an experiment, a chance to gather data and to grow. This way, we can keep moving forward even when things don't go perfectly. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I so appreciate your time. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please don't forget to subscribe. And as always, reach out to me with your thoughts and your stories about reframing failure in your own business. Until next time, keep experimenting and keep growing. Thank you for joining me on this episode of CEO Amplify. I appreciate you being part of our thriving community of ambitious business owners. If you enjoyed today's episode, I kindly ask you to share this podcast with a friend and take a hot minute to rate and leave a review. It would mean the world to me. Your feedback helps me reach more people and continue providing valuable content. Thanks so much for your support. Keep shining, and we'll catch you on the next episode.